Good morning, grade 12s. Today's topic is a relatively difficult topic, so I want you to really pay attention today. And when it gets to the drawing of the graphs and doing the actual comparison, I want you to do that in your workbook with me. All right, so you can take out your workbook and then you write today's date. Your heading is comparison with perfect competition. Okay, basically we are going to be comparing the monopoly with the perfect competitor. All right, you can make your heading comparison of monopoly with perfect competition. All right, when it gets to the drawing of the graph, I want you to turn your book sideways so that you can draw the two graphs next to each other. The differences are just more clearer like that. Okay, so now before we do this comparison, okay, remember I said to you that the reason why we do the perfect market as a market structure is so that we can use it as a yardstick to compare all the other market structures against, because the perfect market, it doesn't exist. So we're going to now use the perfect market as the example, as what we aspire to, and then we're going to look at how the monopoly compares to that perfect market. I just want to show you on your guideline, there is the last thing that we need to do for the monopoly. It says compare the monopoly with a perfect competitor in terms of the demand curves, the products that they sell, the prices they charge, the output that they produce, and their equilibrium positions. So if they do ask this as an essay question, you can see it says discuss monopoly in detail. Any of this can be part of an essay question. So they can physically ask you to draw the graph and then do the comparison in terms of these specific characteristics. Okay, so this is what we're going to focus on when we do the comparison. All right, you will write it down as I do it. I'm first just going to go through the assumptions that we are going to make. And then after that, I'm going to draw the graph. And once we have drawn the graph, after the graph is finished, we will actually do the comparison. So in your workbook, I want you to draw the graphs with me, both of them. And then after drawing the graph, when we do the comparison, you are also going to write that comparison down for me so that you can see. It's here in your textbook. Now, I'm not going to go through this theory at all. It is here in your textbook. I just want to show you, obviously, to draw it with me, then you understand how it will be done. And then if we physically use the graph that you have drawn to do the comparison, I just think you're going to understand a bit better. Okay, so now firstly, the assumptions that we are going to make is that first of all, we're going to assume that we can add together all the data of all the individual businesses in the perfect market, but we're going to assume that their cost curves do not change. In other words, what we're going to try and do is we're going to add together all the individual producers without getting the industry. Remember, if we physically do add them together, all the individual businesses, it actually gives us the market demand and the market supply. Okay, but we are going to assume that when we merge all of them, the costs and the revenue of this new merged firm is the same as one of the individual producers. All right, so the new firm retains all the characteristics of a perfect competitor as one of those individual competitors, and they do not act like a monopoly. So even if we add them together, they are still going to look like individual producers in the perfect market, but just one. And just because they won, we're going to assume that they're not going to be acting like a monopoly. So basically, when we're drawing the graphs, we are going to draw the graphs of the individual producer in the perfect market and then the monopoly. And also very important, when we do this comparison, we draw a long run. Okay, we are doing this comparison in the long run, not the short run. So you must remember, for the perfect market, its long run equilibrium position is for the individual producer to make a normal profit. And for the monopoly, our assumption is in the long run, they will be making an economic profit. So that is how we are going to be drawing the graphs. Okay, so if we go ahead now to the drawing of the graphs, you can, as I said, turn your book sideways, or if you can draw the graph small enough, you can do the book in the correct position. but just I want you to draw these graphs next to each other so that the differences are more clear. Okay, so you're going to draw two axes for me. The first one is going to be for the perfect competitor and the individual producer in the perfect market. Okay, and then price, quantity, or revenue and costs there, and quantity or output on the x-axis. And the second axis is for the monopoly. Same thing, vertical axis is cost and revenue or price, and the horizontal axis is for quantity. All right. If you need to pause the video now to do that quickly, then you do so. Pause, get your axis ready, so that when I start drawing the graphs, you are ready to draw the graphs with me. That is the entire point. Don't wait for me to get finished and then you want to draw your graph. That defies the purpose. You need to follow the correct steps and you need to see how it is done. All right, just remember when we start drawing, we are making a comparison in the long run. The long run equilibrium of the individual producer in the perfect market and for the monopoly. So we know that in the long run, my perfect competitor is going to make a normal profit and my monopoly is going to make an economic profit because that is their long run equilibrium positions. All right. So what we're going to do is we're first going to draw the individual producer in the perfect market from beginning to end, and then we are going to add the monopoly. All right, on separate axes, so that you can see the difference. It is possible to do it on one axis. That we are going to do in the next lesson. All right, the next lesson I'm physically going to put it together, but it is way, way, way more difficult. It is way easier to do it separately like this. And if you are ever asked to do it, you're not going to try and be a hero and do it the difficult way. You're going to want the marks. Marks is better than heroism. So you're going to do it this way, the way that we are doing it today. Okay. So when we draw the perfect competitor, obviously we have to follow our steps. The steps that we always follow when we are drawing the profit maximization positions. All right. So first of all, the step one is to draw my demand and average revenue and marginal revenue. We know in the perfect competitor, your individual producer is a price taker. Okay, and because of that, his demand curve is relative or perfectly elastic. Now, a horizontal line, perfectly elastic at the level of the market price. So we're going to add it in, and when you draw it now, I don't want you to go and draw it way up there. Remember, we said perfect competitors, their prices are the lowest out of all the market structures. So draw the demand curve relatively low down on your axis. Okay, vertical line. All right, and then remember our demand, because it is the price is constant. If the market says the price is 10 Rand, our individual producer is a price taker. His demand curve is perfectly elastic at the level of the market price. And also because the price is constant, remember always your price and your average revenue is equal. But because the price is constant, it is also equal to marginal revenue. So the one horizontal graph represents my demand and my average revenue as well as my marginal revenue. This is step one. Okay. In step two, you should know your steps by now. We are going to add marginal cost. All right. So when we're adding marginal cost, we just do it. There we go. And we label the graph immediately. Remember, if your graphs don't have labels, you are not going to get the marks. Okay. Once we have added the marginal cost curve, obviously we need to find the profit maximization point. In the perfect market, this is easy as anything because there is only one intersection. Okay, so when my marginal cost and my marginal revenue intersect, that is going to be my equilibrium. So I'm going to make my little bolletjie and I'm going to call it point E. Once we have found profit maximization point, we need to find the price and the quantity at profit maximization point. Because this is the perfect market, the price is already there. He is a price taker. So all we need to do is we go down dotty to the axis so that we can indicate the quantity. All right, so his profit maximizing output, I am going to make 100. All right, and then the last graph that we need to add is the average cost curve. All right, we need to add the average cost. And remember, it is all about the placement of the average cost now that needs to make this perfect competitor a normal profit. All right, I'm physically going to write it there on the top. Now remember, in the long run, your perfect competitor is supposed to make a normal profit. Now, that is how we have studied it. Now, that is the theory. Now, according to the theory, because of freedom of entry and exit, in the long run, your perfect competitor is only going to be making a normal profit. All right, if you draw it in any other way, your comparison is going to be useless. All right, because it's based on a wrong assumption. Okay, so in the perfect competitor, we have to draw him in such a way that he makes a normal profit. And that means at profit maximization point, my average revenue and my average cost has to be equal. All right, and if you think back to when we've last drawn the perfect market, if average revenue and average cost has to be equal, it means at my profit maximization point, they have to touch or intersect. Okay, we said that we are going to put in this average cost curve. At your profit maximization point, your average cost curve lies on top of your demand curve, your average revenue curve. Now, it is tangent. Remember, when we add the average cost, this is the difficult one, so you do it in pencil. You have to get the shape right. The shape, it has to look like a smiley. You have to get the positioning correct. So at profit maximization, it must be tangent, and it has a relationship with marginal cost. So the lowest point of my average cost curve, it has to intersect with marginal cost. All right, this is easy now after drawing the monopoly now recently. Remember, we go down, down, down until we touch the marginal cost. This has to be the lowest point, and then we start to increase. All right, obviously you label your graph immediately after drawing your graph. This is my average cost curve. And then we can see now that at my profit maximization point, my average revenue is touching, my average cost is touching. So my average revenue is 10, my average cost is 10, average revenue and average cost is equal. So my individual producer is making a normal profit. Okay, now we are finished with a perfect competitor. We are going to move over to the monopoly. All right, remember, for the monopoly, we have to draw an economic profit. In the long run, the theory says that in my monopoly, in the long run, it will make an economic profit. All right, because entry is blocked and he can use his market power to manipulate the prices so that he's able to make an economic profit. All right, so in the long run for the monopoly, it is not possible for him to make, or not likely for him to make, a normal profit or an economic loss. He is going to make an economic profit. So we're going to draw him making an economic profit. Okay, so first of all, we have to draw step 1, demand and average revenue and marginal revenue. Remember, this is the monopoly now, so our demand curve has to slope negatively. All right, there's my demand curve. Because he is a price maker and because his demand curve is the same as the market demand curve. Now, his demand curve is the market demand curve, and the market demand curve is always sloped negatively. All right, and then remember, in all market structures, your average revenue is always equal to the price. So my demand curve is also representing my average revenue curve. But because his demand curve has a negative slope, the implication is that he has to decrease his prices in order to increase his output. And for this reason, his marginal revenue is not equal to the price. His marginal revenue is less than the price. Now, remember, marginal revenue is always less than the price. For unit 1, your marginal revenue equals the price, but every unit after that, it is less than the price. Therefore, our marginal revenue curve must be below my demand curve. It starts at the same point there at the top, but then every unit after that, it is less than the price. So my marginal revenue curve is below my demand curve. Okay, and that is step 1. In the perfect market, step 1 is one horizontal graph. In the monopoly, it is two separate negatively sloping graphs. Okay. Now, if we look at the step 2, step 2 is we have to add our marginal cost graph. So we just do it. Okay, there's my marginal cost graph. I add it and I label immediately. Okay, there's my marginal cost graph. Okay, step 3 is we need to find profit maximization. Okay, remember the profit maximization rules are exactly the same. Okay, so my profits are maximized where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. There where the two graphs intersect, we're going to be making our little bolletjie and we're going to label it point E1. Okay, because we're drawing two graphs together now. If this is point E, this has to be point E1. All right, because in the essay we're going to refer to this as the different profit maximization points. Okay, now remember, when we find the price, the monopoly is a price maker. So he has to determine the price and the quantity where he will maximize his profits. Okay, so now we can see the perfect market, the price is already there. For the monopoly, there's no price because he has to decide on the price. He is the price maker. Remember, this is not the price. Now, we are never going to do this. That is the value of marginal revenue and marginal cost. We don't care what that is. We find the value of the price on the demand curve. Demand curve indicates the price. So from my equilibrium point, I'm going to go up, up, up. When I touch my demand curve, I'm going to make my little bolletjie and then I take it to the side so that I can give it a price. All right, we have to now make it higher. Remember, we're busy with a comparison. So this was lower. Now you can see this price is lower. This one is higher up. So obviously we have to give it a value that is higher than 10 Rand. Okay. If you're scared of making a mistake, you do P1 there and you do P2 there. Okay. But this is higher. Now it has to be higher. All right. To find the quantity, obviously we do what we always do and we go down to my quantity axis. All right, and we're going to make this only 50. All right, you will see that this is 100. We know that the output level of the monopoly is less. Okay, you can see this, it looks like slightly longer, this distance, than this one. Okay, but you manipulate your numbers. It's the numbers that you're going to discuss in your comparison. All right, so we want the output to be lower. So you give it a lower value, or again, Q1, Q2, whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, and now when we add the average cost to the monopoly, that is my next step. I need to add the average cost. Remember, we want him to make an economic profit. So that means that my average revenue now at profit maximization point, my average revenue has to be more than my average cost. Okay, because we want him now to make an economic profit. We know the theory says the monopoly will make an economic profit in the long run. Okay, so when we add the average cost, again, this is your difficult one. So you do it in pencil first. You can always put color later. Remember, the shape of the average cost has to be correct. It looks like the smiley. The positioning has to be correct. So at my profit maximization point, all along this dotted line, it has to be below my average revenue graph. Okay, so it can't be up there. It has to be lower. Okay, and again, remember I said it can be anywhere below the average revenue graph. So it can go in between equilibrium and my demand curve. It can go through the equilibrium if you want. It can go below the equilibrium if you want, as long as it is below my average revenue graph. Plus, remember, it has a relationship with my marginal cost. Okay, at my marginal cost, that it has to be where it intersects with average cost, it has to be at the level where average cost is at its lowest. Okay, so again, when we add it, remember, we are aiming for my marginal cost graph. Okay, we're aiming for marginal cost graph. So we're going to go down, 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 down. When I touch my marginal cost curve, that is where I'm going to turn up. All right, and then I'm going to label it AC. All right. Remember, you decrease it as a decreasing slope until it touches the marginal cost. As soon as it touches marginal cost, you have to start turning upwards. Okay. All right, I'm going to give you a minute to put in your average cost. And then now, just for the purpose of the comparison, obviously I know when we normally draw an economic profit, we would now do the shading. Okay. I'm going to find the value of average cost, but we're not going to shade because it's not about the economic profit really, okay? It is just about the comparison. All right, so at my profit maximization point, I'm going to make a little body key on my average cost curve. Remember, from profit maximization, you move towards your average cost curve. It can be higher up, it can be lower down, depends on how you've drawn your graph, okay? And then I'm going to make my dotty keys to the side. And I'm going to give average cost a value, whatever you feel like giving it. Okay, it is still higher than this one. Okay, so I'm going to make mine 15, but that doesn't matter. That's not the important bit. All right, so you've made your bullet key there on the graph. Okay, and then you find the value of your average cost. Obviously, we know that this is going to be now our shaded area. All right, once we have drawn the graphs, now we are going to do the comparison based on the graph. All right. I'm just going to take this where I can type. All right, so we're going to look at those graphs. We're going to keep them there so that we can keep referring back to them. Okay. Just want to make it smaller so it's going to fit a little bit better. Okay, so now when we do the comparison, we're going to look every single time at what is the situation for the perfect market and what is the situation for the monopoly. Okay, because we are doing a comparison now, but based on the graphs that we have drawn. Okay, so we have our graphs there. We know the demand curve in the perfect market. Obviously, in an essay, you're going to write this out in full sentences. I'm just going to write it very shortly now because just to get it done, right? Just shortly so that you can study this. But in the exam, you must remember that you need to write it in full sentences. So whatever I'm typing up here, this has to be written in your book. You write this underneath your graphs. You're going to do this comparison now with me. You're going to write it out. Okay, I'm going to want to see this in your book when I see you on Monday. Okay, so we said in the perfect market, the demand curve is perfectly elastic or horizontal. All right, we can see that on the demand curve there. It's perfectly elastic or horizontal. Okay, for the monopoly, obviously it is negatively sloping. Okay, it has a negative slope because it is the market demand curve. Okay, and the market demand curve always has a negative slope. And it is relatively inelastic. All right, inelastic because it's relatively steep. It's not the slope of it is relatively steep. Okay, that is your demand curve. Okay, then if we're going to look at the product, now this is all theory. This is not something that we get from the graph necessarily. In the perfect market, we said products are homogeneous, exactly the same. Exactly the same, 100% exactly the same. Okay, perfect substitutes for each other. All right, for the monopoly, we said that the products are unique. All right, in other words, there's no close substitutes. All right, your consumers are either going to use the product of the monopoly or they're going to just live without it. Their needs are not going to be satisfied. There are no other products that is going to satisfy the same needs. All right, now if we go back to the graph, in terms of the prices, now when you draw the graph, obviously you have to refer in this discussion to your graph. Okay, I've had many people over the years. You will see in the textbook, I'm going to go back there now, that I refer to the price of the monopoly as PM and the price of the perfect market is PP or whatever it might be, you have to refer to your graph. So you can't in your graph call it 10 Rand and 15 Rand or 20 Rand or 100 Rand or whatever. And here in your discussion, you call it PM and PP and what you can't, you have to use the same labels. All right. So in the perfect market, our price, if we go up to the graph again, okay, remember at my profit maximization position, my price is 10 Rand. Okay, so this is what I'm going to write there. My price is 10 Rand. In the graph above, profits are maximized at point E, and then at point E, the price is indicated as 10 Rand, right? For the monopoly, same thing, okay? We're going to say that profits are maximized where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. There's my marginal cost, there's my marginal revenue, there's my equilibrium point, okay? Remember, we find the price on the demand curve. So up, up, up. My price for the monopoly is 20 Rand. Okay, and now obviously we need to do the comparison. Okay, the price that the monopolist asks is higher than the price of the perfect competitor. All right, that's the comparison. Right, we say the perfect market, this is the price. The monopoly, this is the price. Obviously, we can see that the monopolist's price is much higher than the price that the perfect competitor would be asking. Okay, if we look at the output level, obviously you stop this video at any given point in time that you need to write. Yeah? You don't write as fast as what I type, so you stop it and you quickly write what you need to. All right, so again, we're going to look in the perfect market. Okay, when we go up to the graph, profits are maximized here by point E. What is my profit maximizing output? It is 100 units. All right, so at my equilibrium point, my perfect market is producing 100 units. In the monopoly market structure, we go back to the graph. We can see that at my profit maximization point, my profit maximizing output is only 50 units. All right, it is 50 units. And then we make the comparison, okay? The monopolist profit maximizing output is lower than the output of the perfect competitor. All right, so we can see that the perfect competitor will produce a larger amount of output but he will charge lower prices. Okay, so the perfect competitor compared to the monopolist, he will produce a larger quantity of output but he will charge lower prices. Okay, in terms of equilibrium positions, we are going to make the same comparison. Okay, in the perfect market, remember we said from the beginning, we need to draw the graph showing a normal profit. The long run equilibrium position for the perfect market is to make a normal profit. All right, whereas the monopolist, his long run equilibrium position, go back to the graph. Remember we said he has to make an economic profit. We can see it on the graph, right? His average costs is much lower than his average revenue. So the monopoly will be making an economic profit. But remember, all of this is based on the long run. Okay, equilibrium position will be economic profit for the monopolist. Okay, and this is all that your exam guideline is asking for. Up to there, the comparison up to equilibrium positions. I have just added technical efficiency and allocative efficiency so that you can understand what it means. Okay, in chapter 6, when we wrote the NENI essays, two of the headings there, okay, you didn't use it in your NENI headings, but two of the headings there that we can use for comparison is efficiency, technical and allocative efficiency. Okay, so I just want to show you, first of all, technical efficiency means that when the business, whether it's the monopolist or whether it is the monopolist, it doesn't matter, but when the business maximizes its profits, it is producing at the lowest level of average cost. This is what technical efficiency means. Okay, this is when a firm is technically efficient. All right, if a firm is technically efficient, it means that when he maximizes his profits, he's producing at the lowest possible average cost. All right, now if we look at the perfect market, again, if we go to the graph, there where he's maximizing his profits, yeah, at point E, we can see this is exactly where average cost is at its lowest point. Okay, so my perfect market, when he maximizes his profits, he is productively efficient, or technically efficient. It's the same thing, it's just different terminology. Okay, in the long run, he is technically efficient because when he maximizes his profits, his average cost is the lowest it can possibly be. All right, for the monopoly, all right, we can see that is my profit maximization point. You can see the lowest point of the average cost is slightly lower than that. Now you can see it's not at the exact lowest point of the average cost. So what this means is my monopoly is technically inefficient. All right, because when he is maximizing his profits, he is not producing at the lowest possible average cost. All right, allocative efficiency. Basically, what we are going to be looking at is that your price or average revenue, it's the same thing, must be the same as marginal cost. Okay, then a firm is technically allocatively efficient. All right, so if we look at the perfect market, when he maximizes his profits, here where he's maximizing his profits, you will see the price is 10 Rand and my marginal cost intersects here as well. Okay, so that means that for the perfect market, his price equals his marginal cost, and therefore he is allocatively efficient. All right, he's allocatively efficient. For the monopoly, when we go and look at his situation, at his profit maximization point, his price is there, it's 20 on the demand curve. His marginal cost is here at E1. Okay, it is somewhere between 15 and 20. So his price is higher than the marginal cost. Okay, his price is higher than the marginal cost. This means that he is allocatively inefficient. All right, allocative efficiency. Literally, it means that we're producing the correct product mix, what consumers are wanting. The supply of the market is satisfying the demand of the consumers, right? And in the perfect market, we saw that there was a large amount of output at lower prices. So that means more goods are produced, more people are able to afford it because of the lower prices, so more needs will be satisfied. Whereas in the monopoly, the output is limited. Obviously, he reduces the output so that he can increase his price. So fewer goods are produced and higher prices are charged. So less people will actually have access to that, which makes him also allocatively inefficient. Not many needs will be satisfied. Okay, so I want you up to here, all of this that we have done, all this whole discussion. This is very short, obviously, but I want you to copy this in your book. All right, I'm just going to quickly jump back to the textbook just to explain to you what is in the textbook. Okay, obviously, this discussion here is based on the graph in your textbook. Okay, this is what I was talking about earlier. The QC is the quantity that is produced by the individual producer. PC, the price that is charged by the individual producer for perfect competition. For the monopoly, QM is his output, PM is his price. Okay, but you will see that is the labeling that was used on this graph. So if you want, you can't, physically, you can't now go and just study what is written here in your textbook and try and memorize what is standing here in the textbook. That is stupid. Don't be stupid, work smartly. You draw your graph and then you tell the story of your graph. Okay, you'll see in here I've discussed productive efficiency, I've discussed allocative efficiency, everything that we have done now just based on the graph that we have drawn. All right, this is your profit situation. Okay, we said that in the perfect competition, there's normal profit in the long run. The monopolist will make economic profit in the long run. Okay, and then obviously you indicate the information. You discuss your profit maximization positions. And the perfect competitor makes a normal profit because his average cost is equal to his average revenue. The monopolist makes economic profit because his average cost is more or less. His average cost is less than his average revenue. All right. And then you can refer to the shaded area if you shaded it. Okay. We didn't shade it in this case now. All right. So then we can say, when you put it all together, that the perfect market, the output levels will be higher, the price will be lower, so he only makes a normal profit. Okay, the monopolist is inefficient because he charges a high price, he supplies a lower quantity, and he still earns an economic profit. Okay, remember what is taking the profits away? Perfect competition is making a normal profit because there's freedom of entry and exit, and when others enter the industry's economics will disappear in the long run. Whereas in the case of the monopoly, there's barriers to entry. Entry is blocked. Right, so people cannot enter the industry, so therefore you will make an economic profit even in the long run. Right, hereby you can actually write here, because of freedom of entry and exit. Okay, because there's freedom of entry and exit, when our individual producer is making an economic profit in the short run, others enter the industry, the prices will drop, and his economic profits will disappear in the long run. With a monopolist, he can make an economic profit even in the long run because entry is blocked completely. All right, so nobody can enter his industry. He will continue to make an economic profit into the long run as well. All right, again, this is an easy essay to write. Okay, if you know what you're doing in terms of the graphs. Now, if you can draw both of the graphs, you remember your assumptions, normal profit for the individual producer in the perfect market, economic profit for the monopolist. You draw it correctly, you remember the quantity has to be lower for the monopolist, the price has to be lower for the perfect market. You remember our little assumptions, then this is really an easy essay to write. To do the comparison, they give you the headings, they say, do a comparison in terms of price and output and demand curve and. Okay, so this which you have written now, okay, all this information that you have written down now, this is obviously very shortly. You cannot do it shortly like this. You cannot list like this. Obviously, you have to write this in full sentences, but then the essay will write itself, because you are just discussing your graphs. Just remember, they mark the graphs first, so your discussion must match your graph. Okay, you cannot call the prices 10 Rand, 20 Rand, or whatever, and then your discussion refer to P1 and Q1 or whatever. It has to link to the graph. All right, that is very, very important. Otherwise, they mark the graph and you get 0 for your discussions, and you don't want that. Okay, right, this is the comparison. As I said, this is a comparison using 2 graphs. The next lesson, we're going to do a comparison on 1 graph. That is way more difficult than this. This is your preferred option if they ask this as an essay question.